During the 20th century, African Americans suffered with having no rights or privileges, and many of them fought for a change. Here, the issue of education was brought to the public eye. Because of this increase of people's concerns of education, many changes and advancement has been made to implement civil rights in schools. Education will become essential to many people in the United States. Each year, schools were being created throughout the United States and were becoming more advanced. The main dilemma with this happening was that only upper and middle class whites were able to attend. African Americans would attempt to open some small schools for themselves. Although some survive, they will deal with a great number of problems. Some problems included teacher salaries, shorter school years, and shortages of books, desks, and other supplies.
Lloyd Lionel Gaines was a 25-year-old male whose roots were set in St. Louis. He had high aspirations of being a lawyer, which should not have been out of his reach. The only problem was that the go-to black school, Lincoln University, did not have a law program for him to attend. Gaines then decided to apply to the University of Missouri, but was swiftly denied. Discouraged and wanting a quality education, Gaines and the NAACP took this matter up in court. Gaines's lawyer argued that they were not trying to go against the separate but equal ruling. They were simply stating that if Missouri offered its white citizens a law school, it had to offer its black citizens a law school every bit as good. This claim seemed to resonate with the United States Supreme Court, and they ruled in favor of Gaines. The ruling said that states that provided a school for white students must also provide an in-state school to black students as well. The NAACP and Gaines won the lawsuit, but it was not exactly what they expected. Missouri decided that instead of having Gaines admitted into the University of Missouri, they would give up $200,000 to set up a law school for Lincoln.
Fannie Marie Tolson, born in 1911, was the first African American to teach in the desegregated schools of Fayette, Missouri. Equality in education among African Americans has been a very long process. Though in her lifetime, Fannie got to see many victories for the black race in America, including the Brown decision, play out, major racial discrimination in education, as well as almost every other aspect of life, still existed after these decisions and changes were put into place. The first school Fannie attended was a Lincoln school, where none of the teachers were college educated. There were about 180 students in the school and hardly any books, and all the books they did have were raggedy and beat up, and Fannie knew that this was very different from the white schools. When Fannie took her first teaching job in Bowling Green, Missouri, they didn't have a high school for blacks, and so she had to teach her junior and senior classes in a restaurant. The first integrated classes she taught were 6th grade social studies and study hall. They had never in that county had a brown-skinned person teach, Fannie said. One time, Fannie had a white girl in her class that especially seemed to love her. "My old gray-headed grandmother told me niggers didn't know nothing," the girl said. Fannie laughed and replied with, What'd you tell her?" The girl responded, "I told her she's a liar, and she smacked me." A year later, the grandmother told the girl she would pay for the girl to take a friend to London. The girl said she wanted to take Fannie, and the grandmother said no. Being a black teacher for an integrated school was not easy.
Throughout the 1950s, African Americans continued to face legally sanctioned segregation, racial discrimination, and disfranchisement. In order to stop the cycle that blacks were constrained by, the NAACP and Thurgood Marshall established a legal program to confront the issues of inequality in education by using lawsuits to test the separate but equal clause. It wasn't until 1965 that black Americans started to experience the freedom of opportunity and the right to full citizenship. The Brown v. Board of Education argued that separate schooling systems for blacks and whites violated the 14th Amendment, and its results led to many changes in institutions. In Missouri, Lincoln University, a school intended to serve freed African Americans, responded by opening its doors to all races that met their entrance criteria. The school was inspired by Booker T. Washington with its fundamental idea of combining study and labor. Although many black leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois was opposed to this approach of learning, Washington managed to attract many supporters among the white community. They believed that blacks should obtain skills to become productive members of society. They enjoyed Washington's acceptance of white superiority and made generous donations to Washington's Tuskegee Institute.
The progression of education has been happening surely but steadily. In the 18th century, the United States was born and began developing into a great power over the years. Some issues that held the United States back from reaching its full potential were slavery, segregation, and discrimination. These issues made it very difficult for blacks to get an adequate education, especially during the earlier times of the country. However, there was still progression, even though it was slow at first. As the time went on, blacks slowly began to get more access to education and began opening their own schools. Black universities and colleges were being built in the later 19th century after the Civil War, such as Hampton University in Virginia. During the 20th century, a number of schools and universities had been built for blacks, but they were still separated and not equal.